What's going to happen when you go to Yahoo Finance, New York Times, Washington Post? You can scroll to the bottom of these articles and it already starts saying, this article is generated by AI or by ChatGPT. So half of the stuff we see on the internet isn't real. The other half that we see is a facade presented by people.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. And then Mark Zuckerberg comes in and he says, hey, the only issue with generative AI right now and being able to produce content at mass speed is just processing power and speed. So once we kind of crack that barrier, people are going to scroll, and in real time, AI will create the piece of content that is relevant to you. So you have your camera on because you've enabled it in your settings. It's scanning your irises, your facial expressions, how you're acting towards that content. And as soon as you swipe, the AI will generate in real time content that is relevant to you.
Do you think TikTok's doing that now?
Absolutely. But they have to depend on people. What happens when the platform no longer has to depend on creators? Are we in the last wind of influencers? Like why would you need a Luke Belmar when you can have a literal artificial intelligence unit that memorizes every philosophy book, every piece of scripture, every textbook, every mathematics book, every physics book, and compiles it all, and you can just listen to this person or this individual, this entity or this thing? It's going to be hard to compete. So how do you integrate? How do you assimilate? How do you build something that is hard for AI to replace? And that's what I set out to build, because I'm building something that's going to be relevant in 20 years.
Yeah.
You've made money. I've
made money. You
can
use AI as a content distribution means to get people within the community.
And it's to build it, right? Like, it's understanding that if you don't use it, it'll be used against you. When you begin to understand, for example, how the samurai became extinct, it was gunpowder. It was guns. When the British came and colonized, swords couldn't resist. They couldn't fight, right? It doesn't matter how much loyalty, it didn't matter, because they were outmaneuvered by technology. So what happens when AI becomes so advanced? That's why we saw OpenAI literally become a government agency. That entire Microsoft takeover, bro, that wasn't an internal investment. Hey, we're just dumping $10 billion into you. You didn't think there's any stipulations? Look at the new board. There's some like former feds in there. So you're like, okay, is this just a mass weapon right now that's being kind of built? And you begin to evaluate, and like, okay, this thing is actually dangerous or can be utilized for good. We were talking about this idea of technological revolutions cause gaps of renaissance, where people are like, hey, you know what? I can do a lot more of this and create, like Leonardo da Vinci, like Michelangelo, like Donatello, like Nikola Tesla, like Mark Twain, all these individuals that, once they had kind of their philosophy of money figured out, or they were funded, they went on to create stuff, and they created incredible things. So when you look at the Sistine Chapel, that thing wasn't done for profit. It wasn't built like these buildings that we see around us for optimal ROI. No, it was built because it was a piece of art. It represented something. But you need to be able to create space for that to exist. AI is going to create that space because it'll take all the rudimentary tasks that are going to be difficult to do, that people are spending a lot of time and effort doing, like accounting, like data points, like tracking, like analytics. These things take a lot of time, resources, and mental power. We're under this premise of technological advancement. So in this technological advancement, we create rifts or gaps of freedom, right? And there are these points, and you can experience it, whether it's with crypto, it becomes a technological revolution, and you adopt it early, you become super wealthy, whether it's the dot-com boom, whether it's the beginning of social media, whether it's the beginning of distribution. These gaps, these technological gaps and the glitches, right, basically allow people to get out. And what I've come to realize is, if you don't utilize that very short span of time, then the powers that be come in and then they corrupt that technology. Look at the word, the etymological use, and the kind of popularity of the word thinking, or to think, and how often people utilize that word. Now it's often people just sit down and think about it. 100 years ago, when the radio was in the house, to think or thinking in the vocabulary of people was at its all-time low. Why? Because the machine was telling people what to think. So you didn't have to worry about it. But for a period of time, there was a little gap. There was freedom. People were like, hey, you know what? I can tune into a couple radio stations, but then the government's like, hey, there's 10 million, 100 million people listening to this. Let's give them 20 stations. Apparent choices of freedom, right? Apparent choices of freedom. Then what was introduced? The next technological revolution, the television. But what was the kind of issue? The channels. You were limited to what you could see. So then was introduced DVDs and all this stuff, and that's when you started to have the circulation of more freedom. Same thing that happened with the printing press. When you have technological revolutions, they're like, hey, these guys are about to print the Bible and disperse it across the world. No, we can't let that happen. The church was like, no way. We need to control the power. So kill John Wycliffe. There can't be any printing press. There can't be the distribution of the Bible, because that's freedom tools. So what happens? the internet gets introduced. And for the first couple years, let's say first 15 years, the internet is a crazy place. Today, we see it cracking down. We see places like China where you have to literally insert your ID or do a face ID scan in order to access the internet. So the powers that be, there's a gap, which we're talking about, a freedom where you can really capitalize on the technology, and then it gets clamped down on. And it happens over and over and over again. Today, we're in that period of the internet where we still have freedom to make money, build, create. But there will come a time where, dude, right now, most people, you create a social media profile. If they ask you for your ID, your birthday, all your personal information, you'll give it to them.
Yeah.
What happens if in 2 years they declare another national emergency and say, hey, if you leave 5-kilometer radius from your house and we detect it because of social media, there's some sort of scanning or tracking between social accounts, we'll ban your social media profile. And attached to your social media profile is actually your payment, like WeChat. Now you can't pay, and now you're banned. Oh, well, now your car is also attached because it's electric, so there's a kill switch.
Yeah.
So if you drive 5 kilometers outside of your house, the surveillance vehicle will just turn it off. So what happens when you're in this digital prison?
Yeah.
That's what's going to take place for the people that are within the system. So how do you build an alternative system? You have to begin to understand that there's freedom tools out there and that there's periods to utilize them. So the internet right now is this really powerful tool that is very cheap compared to other mediums. I was with a buddy yesterday and he was inquiring about a billboard. $17,000 per month for a billboard on one of these streets.
Yeah.
How much money can I make when I spend $17,000 on short form content distribution? How many impressions could I get versus a billboard? It's a technological difference. It's a revolution. Things are changing. So you need to take advantage when it's cheap and get off of the train when everybody jumps on. Everybody now is jumping on the content, that all this sort of stuff. Well, it's getting oversaturated. Maybe there's something else. Maybe you got to be playing into the future.
You're big on patterns. I look at the music industry and you see that content or music distribution is bigger than music creation itself.
Yes.
Do you think content distribution will be a bigger industry than the actual creation of it?
And distribution is everything because they're the gatekeepers. They're the ones that decide what is and what isn't. I'm famous by choice.
Yeah.
If I wanted to disappear today, I could.
You think people can disappear?
Absolutely. 100%.
What was the deciding factor for you to appear?
It was easy. The gap or the glitch of short form appeared, which was what? You didn't have to be a bitch or bend to the YouTube algorithm.